The last round of the Sinquefield Cup began with Magnus Carlsen half a point ahead of Hikaru Nakamura. In the last round, Nakamura had a very sharp game against Gata Kamsky, which burnt out to a draw. That meant that Carlsen just needed to draw against Aronian to take clear first place. Let's see what happened in their game. So Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces, and it's a very standard Spanish. And this a4 move is the so-called anti-martial, and bishop b7 is possible here. Aronian likes to play b4, as in his first round game against Nakamura, and they're following that exactly. Carlsen took on e5, and in that first round game, Aronian took with the knight and actually ended up in rather a difficult position. Today he played the more solid pawn takes pawn, and they went straight into an endgame. And strangely enough, Carlsen and Aronian have had exactly this position before a few years ago. In that game, Carlsen played bishop c4, and you can see on the queen side that after this, actually white controls some very nice squares here because that pawn has been tempted forward. White controls the c4 square. This knight looks at a5, it also looks at c5, and well, to my eyes, white is already slightly better in this position. Aronian ended up winning that game, but actually Carlsen stood very well. But it's interesting today, instead of bishop c4, Carlsen, no doubt Aronian had some improvement, but Carlsen chose a5, and I don't like this as much. Well, at least the course of the game shows that this pawn move is a little problematic. Okay, let's move on. Bishop c5, good move from Aronian. Seizing this diagonal, and we're going to see there are a few problems on this diagonal here. If Carlsen wants to, he can play very solidly and, for example, trade pieces with bishop e3, or, for example, this, trade pawns in the middle of the board, and the game would probably peter out to a draw. At this stage, of course, Kamsky and Nakamura were still playing, so, well, I'm sure basically Carlsen still wanted to keep something in the position so that he could possibly play for a win. But after this move, excellent move, in fact, Aronian starts to seize the initiative. White would like to claim these nice squares on the queen side, but, well, for the moment, that's quite problematic, as if the knight moves, then obviously the rook will swoop down. So for a moment, white is a little bit tied up, and you can see that Carlsen's having to cover the first rank. But this gives time for Aronian to take the initiative on the queen side. This is a great maneuver, putting the rook to b5. So that ties the knight down to defending the pawn on a5, and we can see that maybe that was premature, playing the pawn to a5. And after this, well, Aronian takes control in the centre of the board. It's hard for white to do anything here. This is a good move, rook c5. The threat, well, there are two threats. One is rook takes knight and taking here, and the other threat is to take on b2 and take on c2. If white exchanges on d4, then, well, black would like to play e5, and that just cements this pawn structure. This pawn is a problem. If you can exchange off this knight, then c2 will be a problem. This is a great position for black. So white can't really take that off. Instead, Carlsen played rook a2, which is a miserable position for the rook. And now a great maneuver from Aronian, putting the knight on d6. Now, if this is exchanged, well, funnily enough, this reminds me of a Sicilian position. The structure is now typical Sicilian, where black has played this pawn forward, and it's able to pressurize the weak pawn on c2, and, well, indeed, a5 is also hanging. So Carlsen has to play knight d2. And now I thought this was a strange decision from Aronian, although it still looks like black is doing well. I thought Aronian was going to play knight b5 and sink the knight on c3, and black has so much pressure. Just very difficult for white to do anything. Instead, Aronian went for the pawn on a5. Now he needs to defend the e-pawn first, and now he's free to take that pawn. And again, he could have backtracked and played knight d6 round to b5 again, and I still think this is the best way for black to play. Tremendous position for black. White is barely has a move there. But instead Aronian took that pawn, which at first glance, well, just looks fine. Black has a pawn up for nothing. But in fact, you can now see it's very hard for black to improve his position. If the knight moves, then the a-pawn drops. The rook has to keep controlling the knight on a5, keep defending the knight on a5. I think Aronian was probably banking on this move, rook d4. Well, seemingly a very nice exchange sacrifice. And then black's pieces start to work after this, and knight takes, and, well, this is just tremendous for black. The knights occupy these squares, the pawns, very powerful, must be winning. But Carlsen found a great move now. He was actually under a bit of time pressure, but he found this move, knight e1. And there's a superb trick here. Watch what happens if rook takes e4. I'm sure Aronian missed this idea, knight e1. Knight d3 hits the rook. The rook has to keep defending the knight on a5. And now c4. Brilliant idea. If the rook goes backwards, you take on a5. If the pawn's taken en passant, then the rook hangs in the middle. And, well, knight takes b3 is, well, it's tricky, but basically white should win that position with an extra piece. What a fantastic trick that is. Let's just see that again. c4, very easy to overlook. So after knight e1, this retreat, Aronian couldn't take on e4, and now Carlsen can solidify his position, stabilize his position. Although black controls the open file, it's actually very, very difficult for black to do anything. Well, the rook came back, and Carlsen came back, and now Aronian shuffles his king round to the queen side, but this doesn't seem to be terribly effective. It's not clear what this king is doing over there, actually. And, well, they reach the time control, and, well, Carlsen is only shuffling back and forth. But, yeah, Aronian as well. And round about here, I think Aronian underestimated the danger. I mean, very easy to do, as white has been doing nothing for ages. I think Aronian should basically repeat the position here by playing rook c5. That means this knight can't move, because pressure to c2, the knight would come back. The rook comes back, and they would probably just repeat the position with a draw. Instead, well, you see the threat here is actually to trap the rook with this knight to d3. That's why rook c5 is necessary. So trap the rook with knight d3 and king e1. So Aronian played the rook back. And now Carlsen shuts out the rook. Remember, black still has problems moving any of these pieces. And now, little by little, Carlsen comes forward. And it was around about here that Aronian actually offered Carlsen a draw. Now, the Kamsky-Nakamura game is long finished, so basically Carlsen knew he only needed a draw to secure outright first place. But he rejected Aronian's draw offer and played for the win. Fantastic attitude that Carlsen has. You know, he can take that draw, the tournament's over, he's the winner, but no, he wanted to play chess. Afterwards he said, well, you know, I came here to play chess. This is his preparation for the World Championship. I came here to play chess, so I thought, why not? What stamina this guy has. I mean, they've already played 3.5 hours chess. No, more than that, over 4 hours by this point. It's extraordinary that, you know, Carlsen just seems to get stronger and stronger. Now white starts the shuffle. In fact, this knight could also head out via h3 to g5. That's also very dangerous, but knight d1 very tricky, coming around to c4 again. And now the rook activates. And, well, knight c4 comes a moment. If Aronian had tried to stop knight c4 with, say, rook d4, then white has a very simple plan here, and that's to play g3 and f4, undermining black's support over d4. Once this is traded, then the rook can come to g1, and, well, there's more trouble there. This is also very dangerous indeed for black. So you can see the tide is turning. Black is only going backwards here. Let's go back. Instead of rook d4, Aronian played king d8, and after knight c4, suddenly black is close to being lost here. I think black's best defense is to give up the exchange and then play the knight back to b7. In that way, well, of course, white could take here, but of course black would win back the exchange. But yeah, and if the king comes to the side, then a5, and black has some kind of solid position now. I mean, I'm sure white should win objectively, but that's tricky to break down. But instead, Aronian took on c4, but now after c5, black is in big trouble, because once the rook goes backwards, you take on a6, and suddenly everything is falling apart in this position. If knight d4, then rook a8 is a good move. If knight c2 check, there's a few tactics to negotiate here, but basically the knight is trapped here. And after rook a8, if king c8, then we take on b4. White is a pawn up, and, well, I think should win this position without too much difficulty. Just check out black's pawns. They are terribly weak once white gets control. So Aronian tried b3, but, well, this was a vain hope. After taking the piece, well, there's more than one way to win, but Carlsen selected knight e1, and the point is that if rook d1 or rook b1, then knight c2 scoops up the pawn and defends the rook. And now black is utterly lost. Well, I'll go through the final few moves. Basically, Aronian was just continuing on inertia here. I mean, this is so simple for white to win. I'll just go to the very end to satisfy those of you that like to see the entire game. Once the knight comes to a solid square, then the game really is up. And, well, Aronian is trying to find some kind of miracle by getting his king in the position, but after this move it's all over, because rook is threatened, and there's also a threat of actually coming in and checkmating black's king here. So in this position Aronian resigned. A brilliant performance from Carlsen, who really showed his stamina and such a great attitude, and he's sending quite a message to Viswanathan Anand there ahead of their World Championship match. So at the end of the tournament, Carlsen wins with 4.5, Nakamura second with 3.5, Aronian 2.5, and Kamsky 1.5. Thanks very much for watching.